Hi, everybody. Eve Harow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network, June 3rd, 2024, the 26th day of ER 5784, meaning that according to the secular calendar, it is almost 8 months since October 7th, since Simchat Torah, and so many things changed. I had a successful trip to the States, speaking about Israel, trying to let people understand what's happening here. It's good to be home, already planning my next trip. But in the meantime, very much involved with what's happening. Last night, I went to sleep crying because I saw a little news clip about one of the fathers of the spotters of the Tatzpitaniyot that have been taken hostage was saying that for all he knows, he has a grandson who is a son of a Hamas person. I don't know how these people, this is torture. This is absolute torture for the families, for the girls, for everybody, for the country. I honestly don't know how these people are coping, because I was sobbing just when I read that, and they're living this nightmare. It's such pure evil. It's so horrible what's happening. And there was that, and there were a whole bunch of other things. So got up this morning, picked myself up, trying to do good, and that's all we can do. So part of doing good, of course, is this podcast and finding interesting people who are doing amazing things to speak to. So today, we're going to talk about a place, but more than that, we're going to talk, obviously, to a person who's involved. Michael Lawrence, thank you so much for joining me today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
All right. So first, maybe a little bit about you before we talk about the wonderful things that you do.
Thanks, Eve. I have to say that one of the first questions I always get is, what is that accent? So my accent, it's one of the unique things I bring to conversation. So
Okay.
my accent is actually New Zealandish. And there aren't many New Zealand Jews in Israel, but I am one of them.
Are there many New Zealand Jews in New Zealand?
Less than there once was, let's put it that way. A lot of Aliyah to Israel. And also a lot of Aliyah to Australia, actually, as people seem to tend towards the larger communities. I've been in Israel actually since June 2000, which is almost 24 years.
24 years, exactly. Wow.
Right. I arrived when this country was a land flowing with milk and honey, and unfortunately, within 3 or 4 months, it became a land of blood and tears, all with the greatness that this land always has and the holiness that it has. But it became a very difficult environment during that period of extreme terrorism and so on. And as you've just shared with us, Eve, we're there again. And
we're there still. It's never really stopped. Sometimes we just keep it at bay a little bit better than others. But yeah. But it's still a land flowing with milk and honey. So otherwise you and I wouldn't be here, right?
There's so much good here. We've just got to keep remembering that and seeing it.
Right. Absolutely. So tell us what you're doing, though. I mean, some of the good that you've been doing, not just since October 7th, but in the decades before.
Well, so I grew up, as I say, in New Zealand, which has got to be the most geographically isolated Jewish community in the world.
May I just ask, how did your family get there?
Oh, that could be the whole session.
All right.
So the most interesting part is that my father is seventh generation Australian. Okay. And originally we can trace our roots way back to Spain, which I think many Jews can. So I'm originally Sephardi.
Right.
On the other side, my grandfather was born in 1921 in Mea Shearim, in the middle of Jerusalem.
Wow.
So, and in 1935, the family literally flipped a coin between New Zealand and South America. It was so tough here during that time,
right,
with the British control of the land, with Arab pogroms and so on. And they chose New Zealand, where they had some relatives. So that side of the family, that's how I got there, to the ends of the earth.
Wow. So so excuse me if I'm being rude, but my audience knows that I love to push. If your father is seventh generation Australian, he was there when it was a penal colony? Just asking.
Well, I don't know what crimes our ancestors committed, but they came through Spain and then to Holland and then to England and then off to Australia. So,
the Jews have been on the run for a long time. And I think you and I both feel that this is it. We're not running anymore. Our homes are here. Our children, in my case, at least my grandchildren are here, and this is it. And this is the only place we've got. And we're going to make sure that it gets safe and good the way that it needs to be so that
100%.
we can
Yeah.
concentrate on making the world a better place, which is really all we ever want to do. So if they would
Right.
just leave us alone.
God willing.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, so you came, what are you trained in? What's
So
your
I'm a
background?
qualified lawyer in New Zealand, and when I made Aliyah and I came to live here, I also qualified. I did all those very difficult tests here and exams
Right.
here to become a qualified lawyer in Israel. I think
Okay.
I'm probably the only New Zealand and Israeli qualified lawyer, perhaps in the world.
Okay, we could
I
do a
do not,
survey. Yeah.
yes, but I'd love to see the results.
Mm.
I don't practice in the law. What I did is that I decided very early on that if I'm going to be living in the Jewish state, and I'm coming from so far away, I want to be involved in activities and organizations and projects that have an impact on the Jewish world, a Jewish world that was so far away from me for most of my upbringing, and an impact on Israeli society. I wanted to make this country really great and a much better society. As much as I could have that impact, I wanted to be involved. So that's my,
Kindred spirit. I totally understand where that's coming
yes.
from, which makes it so
Okay.
frustrating because we try so hard. But the truth is that we have to pat ourselves on the back sometimes, Michael, we do. With all that
Well,
we want to, it's never going to be enough. If we all do our best, it's going to be pretty amazing. It still
yeah.
is.
Look, there's
Hmm.
work to be done, and that's okay.
Okay.
It's a journey. It's a
It is
journey.
most definitely a journey. I think Homer said that. The journey is the thing, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So tell us a little bit about, well, Beit Issie Shapiro, what this amazing organization is that you're working for.
Well, it's interesting. I worked in two really large Jewish organizations before I got to Beit Izzy. I was a decade between the Joint, the JDC, which is the
Hmm.
world's largest humanitarian aid organization in the Jewish world, and at the Jewish Agency. And then at some point during COVID, I was really looking for depth and for focus. Those two organizations do tremendous work
Yes.
in myriads of countries, and I was looking for depth. I wanted to focus on one part of Israeli society and a major need and really go deep there and learn the story and bring good people together to support what's going on in that organization. And I discovered Beit Izzy Shapiro. I had known about it before. They have a tremendous story about how it was created, one man's vision. And today they're reaching, more than 500,000 people a year through the impact of the work they do.
That's an
And
incredible number considering how small this country is. Yeah.
it's an
Okay.
incredible number, and that includes people around the world who we're
Hmm.
reaching, and I can go into that further, and
Well, tell
people
us what
across
it's all
Israel.
about. I mean, what does Beit Issie Shapiro do?
Well, let me tell you a little bit about how we got underway because it's really an incredible story. This man, Izzy Shapiro, he had a dream, and he made Aliyah in the late 70s, came from South Africa, where he'd actually established a residence there for people with disabilities called the Selwyn Siegel Home, which still operates today in Johannesburg. And he came to Israel, his adopted home, and what did he find? He found that if you had a child born with complex or severe disabilities, you only had two bad choices. Either send them away to live in a facility,
Hmm.
and therefore they won't be at home, but they'll receive whatever
Care,
services were available in the 1970s,
right?
or have them at home with their loving parents, all things being equal. The
Hmm.
home is the best place for a child, but then they'll receive no services.
Right.
So that was a really tough choice. And he said, I want to build a place where parents can send these kids, these beautiful souls, um, to preschool, to school, and receive all the education and support and therapeutic services under one roof during the day. Why? So
Hmm.
that parents can have some kind of life.
Right.
Those of us with disabilities in the family, children with disabilities, we know how great their abilities are as well if we just able to harness their abilities. And we also know how difficult it is to have those kinds of challenges in the family and to be able to hold down a job and to be able to look after other siblings and so on.
Right.
It's very complicated. I hear
And
stories
expensive and quite
and
expensive as
expensive,
well. Yes.
100%. And I
Right.
hear stories from people in New York and from London and other places that when they have someone in the family with a disability, or their world falls apart, or they have to give up work, and they spend their entire lives running from every state around the East Coast to this
Hmm.
expert and this therapist. Izzy wanted to see it under one roof.
Now, let me
And
just ask, these are physical disabilities, emotional disabilities, everything? How do you?
We cover all disabilities: physical, cognitive, intellectual,
Hmm.
developmental disabilities, from ages babies through to, in our dental clinic and our hydrotherapy pools, we have people in their 90s.
No
So we're
way.
really
Wow.
across the spectrum, adults and children. Um, and we try to reach any and all of those that we can, both here and overseas. I'll tell you that Izzie's dream came true, but he never saw it. He actually, on his first fundraising trip to the United States, very tragically, he had a major heart attack
Oh
on his
no.
flight between New York and Los Angeles, and he passed away on the flight.
Oh my
And
goodness.
and what happened there on was that his daughter, Naomi, was about 29 years old at the time, a community social worker, recently qualified. She went round at the Shiva during the morning period and she said, "We're not going to let Dad's dream die. We're going to open a
Wow.
place like this." And jump to the end of the story. 3 years ago, she was awarded the Israel Prize, which is Israel's greatest honor for lifetime achievement, because not only did she open a place in her father's memory, she changed the landscape of
Unbelievable.
how we look at people with disabilities in Israel, how we build an inclusive society.
So where
So it's
is
a
Beit Issie Shapiro located in Israel?
Beit Shapiro is in Ranana.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Just central
that's
Israel, for those who don't know.
central
Okay.
Israel, about 20 minutes out of Tel Aviv on a good
Mm-hmm.
day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there we have now a major facility. It's a place which is not only about direct service. We do provide direct service to more than 2,000 people a month, but we're also innovators. We're pioneers. And that's one thing that people often ask us is, I don't understand. You folks have been open for 45 years. You only have one major campus. What's going on? And the answer is that they took a decision very early on that we don't want to be a Starbucks or McDonald's chain of disability facilities.
Mm-hmm.
That's We're not that. What we want to focus on is how do we identify gaps in the disability service area of this country and around the world, and then let's innovate, let's research, and then let's scale what we create so that people across Israel and around the world can benefit from it.
That's
And
so
that's
Israel. That is so Israel. We take something that exists, figure out how we can make it better. I just had this
100%.
conversation on Shabbat with someone who's a major, let's just say he in one of the major firms in America. He's
Mm-hmm.
a major guy, and he was telling me how people love, people on his level love coming to Israel because they don't hear Israelis comparing themselves to to Caltech or to MIT or anything. They hear them focused on what it is that they're doing here, what their vision is, and how they're going to get there. And that it is such an exciting place to come because there's this constant need, almost like burning inside, to make it better. I was there. I was at Beit Shapiro a few years ago, and there were people there from other places in the world. They were on a tour to do exactly what you're describing right now, to learn about some of the innovations and bring it back to their home country and make it better for for their kids and their adults
Yeah.
there.
Actually, Eve, it's interesting that you mentioned that. Just this morning, we had therapists in from Nepal and India at Beit
Wow.
Izzy learning, and we've trained over the years 90,000 professionals and therapists from around the world and across Israel. So that is what we talk
Wow.
about when we talk about scale. We have our own training institute. Everything we develop and create, whether it be apps, technology, different and new therapies, we're committed to scaling them and sharing our best practices.
That's incredible. Let the
That's how you
world
check.
let the world boycott you guys, right? Oh,
100%.
have
There'd
you,
be a lot of
without
people.
mentioning names, and if you can't, I don't want you to get into any problems, but have people come from countries that don't officially have relationships with us, but because of what we're doing here and because they're also good people who want to help the people in their own country, they kind of bypass and are able to come, or that's too complicated? Don't mention names. Just curious.
No, it's a great question. First of all, I'll tell you that we have worked in more than 30 countries and have relationships all across the world. We were the first disability organization in Israel, by the way, to get receive advisory status to the UN. Perhaps that doesn't deserve a medal today, where none of us are particularly fond of the UN right
The
now.
UN doesn't deserve us. Let's put it that
Right.
way. Okay.
Very
Yes.
nicely said. But on the other hand, our ability to be in touch through the UN over the decades and influence policy and the way that people with disabilities are treated and attitudes and behavior towards the disability community has been very influential. We work in South Africa. Okay, we
Oh,
have partnerships there and have had for years. We work very strongly with Florida International University. We've had relationship around leadership development for people with disabilities with Harvard in the US. We've done hydrotherapy training in many places. Just in the last couple of years in Toronto, they opened a new center there for hydrotherapy and for swimming. They brought our therapists from Israel to train there in Toronto. And a couple of years ago, we ran the first ever hydrotherapy training in Ghana, in Africa, with
really?
35 people there. And we sent two therapists there. And for example, there, the folks in Ghana, they couldn't afford our training. So what
Mm-hmm.
did we do? We at Beit Issie, we raised philanthropic money in the UK. A donor in London gave a donation to Beit Issie so that we could run the training in Ghana.
Wow,
So
that's beautiful.
we're really committed to making the world a better place for people with disabilities and to really change the fabric of society in that respect.
Right. The truth is, and I've thought about this for a long time, also because I know a lot of angry people that we all have disabilities. Some just don't show, but either physical or emotional. Some people just can't get their things together. So, I mean, what you're doing here is really just incredible and affects way beyond, I would say, the actual people that you're treating. Because as you said before, there's the family, there's the friends, there's the
Oh,
neighbors, there's their
100%.
whole surrounding that thereby changes. So let me ask you, though, obviously the big question is how have things changed, and if so, since October 7th for you? Have you been able to plug in? Because one of the things that's not really being talked about, because we focus on the families of the fallen soldiers, but there are a tremendous number of soldiers who are now physically disabled, and many of them emotionally, of course, PTSD and traumatized as well. That's going to change, I think, the face of Israeli society now in terms of having, more access. I mean, we've always had veterans, but this is really because of modern medicine. People who would have died because they stepped on a mine are now surviving, thank God, but minus, their legs or whatever it is. So there's going to be a tremendous need in order to bring them, to reach their potential and their abilities just in a different way than they would have before the injury happened. So are you able to also, have you been able to get in there and help?
Yeah, so I'll take you back almost 8 months to that terrible day. And I would say that the morning of October 8th, our board of trustees and Amir Lerner, our CEO, took a decision very early, and that was that Beit Issie being the gold standard for therapies um, around disabilities, we would open up Beit Issie now immediately after October 7th to people who had seen and heard terrible, terrible things in the south or in the north. And we would open up Beit Issie to them free of charge services, whatever they need. So we had
Wow.
more than 1,200 people come to Beit Issie from Israel's north and south who received everything from emotional and psychotherapy, psychotrauma therapy, all for free, dental treatments that they needed done, hydrotherapy. We had people who were in the middle of hydrotherapy treatments that couldn't continue. We had a woman come in who was really in her last week of pregnancy, who had been on one of the kibbutzim in the south, and she came to relax and try to regather herself before her birth. She came to our hydrotherapy pool. We had children in the tens and tens who needed emotional therapy, who needed a safe place, kids who were locked into hotels,
Right.
as evacuees, who hadn't stepped out of their hotel rooms from fear. And they came to Beit Issie, which was their solace, which was their place of safe space where they had a therapist to speak to, where they had where the family had support. So straight away we were on the ball. We immediately started training people online in English, Hebrew, and Arabic about how to work with people with disabilities during war and crisis.
You have therapists that speak a lot of different languages, because we've got
Uh,
a big
we
population
have
here of Olim.
Yeah, we have a lot of English speakers. We
Good.
also work a lot with actually with Arab Israelis as well. We
Excellent.
have we have a mini center in Kalansawa because we discovered 20 years ago that the gaps there are enormous, as well as in the general population in Israel. So that's what we did in the beginning of the war. Now we have two major projects that we're working on. And you mentioned soldiers, and I know
Right.
that the Ministry of Defense in Israel is predicting up to 20,000 seriously wounded soldiers by the end of this year. It's a number that those of us with
Can't
relatives and
grasp.
friends, can't fathom.
Yeah.
Literally can't put it, can't understand what that number means. We're expecting, unfortunately, 20,000 soldiers who will be seriously wounded. And Beit Issie has stepped forward and said, we have incredible expertise in assistive technology that is helping people who can't communicate to communicate through technology. It's a game changer. For you and I, Eve, technology is a nice to have. For them, it's a must have.
What do you mean? Give me an example.
I'll give you an example of someone who can no longer use their limbs
Okay.
and cannot speak.
Okay.
How do they communicate with the medical staff or their families?
Right.
And what we do there, I tell you where this came from. We got a call early in the war from Soroka Hospital, which is in Beersheba, of course. And they said to us they have this soldier who's got serious spinal cord damage and is unable to communicate and is in and out of consciousness. And they have no way to understand what he knows, what he doesn't know, what he's feeling, and so on. They heard about Beit Issie. Someone told them, get in touch with Beit Issie. That day, we sent two therapists from Beit Issie in Ranana down to Beersheba, and they immediately started working with the family and with the medical staff and with the soldier as much as they could. What did they teach him? How to communicate and type on a keyboard on the tablet by using the pupils in his eyes. It's called eye gaze. Okay, and this is what we use a lot with children and adults who cannot communicate. A few days later, we got a call, an Erev Shabbat, and the medical staff said to us today, the soldier typed for us with his eyes, Lama Ani. Why?
Why me? Why me?
And they said, what are you trying to say? Are you trying to say Lama Ani Khan?
Why am I here?
Why am I here? And he nodded his head. And this was the first time since he had lost all movement in his body and a serious injury to his spinal cord, that the family and the medical staff now understood his brain is alive. He is able to communicate, and he wants to know where he is and what happened. And you can only imagine, I mean, the tears of bitter tears or bittersweet tears that his family now understands that inside there is a soul and someone asking for help.
Right.
And those are the stories we're getting. And through our partnership with Restart Global, which is a huge volunteer network, which works with veterans, which works with injured soldiers, we're going to bring something to these soldiers' lives that is not provided by other organizations or other frameworks within Israel. And that's our added value. Whatever we produce, as I said before, whatever we produce, we will try to spread as wide as we can to make impact. And these soldiers need us right now.
Yeah, and their families, and Israel, and the world. I mean, I hope what we're dealing with never goes anywhere else, even though we know it's already there. It's just beyond comprehension what we're going through now. But it's so wonderful that you were already in place, because I know from talking to therapists and talking to other organizations, they're scrambling. Nobody expected all of this, a lot of what's happening. The Israelis are going on the fly, a lot of the therapists here. How do you deal with this? There are so many things here that they're going to write the book on it. They're going to write the research on it. And you guys have been there for civilians, for so mmany years that you're able to just step in here, unfortunately.
Look, I think that morning after Beit Issie felt like what a lot of Israelis felt, that whatever we can give right now, we have to step forward and give. Right. And, we weren't on the front lines dealing with the wounded and injured and sadly those who were murdered, but we had hundreds
you are on the front
families
lines
who needed us, who were traumatized, who were without homes and without anywhere to turn. And thank God our doors were open and we were able to give them what we know to do best.
One of the talks that I gave when I was in the States, and it's a talk that's under development all the time in my brain, is about pikuach nefesh and Shabbat, right? So there's this idea, it's not just an idea, it's very strong, that You can do whatever you can, even if you're Shabbat observant, to save. It's usually translated as a life, right? No matter what has to be done, you do it. Even you're celebrating Shabbat differently if you're doing that. But the word itself, the term itself, is not pikuach guf. It's not saving a body. It's pikuach nefesh, which actually means saving the soul. And that's what I'm saying. It was a different conversation, and it was about how the rabbis are like really, stretching as far as they possibly can that definition in order to allow things to happen on Shabbat that wouldn't ordinarily happen, and only because of the course of the war, and not just on Shabbat. But you're there. I mean, this is what you're doing. So, you're not a surgeon, but you are saving souls. You are saving lives. Whatever has happened, you're going to pull that together so that these people are glad that they were saved, because some people are not always so happy that they're alive because they're in a different situation than we were before. And you're able to say, no, it's still a life worth living. It's going to be a different life than you had planned. But it is most definitely a life worth living, and you're going to accomplish maybe even greater things than you would have otherwise. And that's really where I see Israel. Like we all come, we're all at this crazy fork in the road. This is not where we wanted to be. But we're all doing something else. It's not what we planned, but it's something else, and it will have tremendous value and take us to places that we might not have gone to otherwise, as a society, as individuals. Sure. And you're right there. Your organization's right there. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, really. We're glad to be there. And you mentioned nefesh and the soul, and that's, our mental health work now is so important. If you look at the statistics and you look at the research, people with developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, suffer so much more. Not to judge anyone suffering, yeah?
Right.
Everyone suffers, but someone who has difficulty understanding a crisis or a war or a tragedy going on around them, the trauma and the anxiety going on inside that nefesh, inside that soul, is absolutely tremendous. And one thing, unfortunately, we've found is not only is there a huge gap in mental health services in Israel, we all know that. Yes. I think whatever happens at the end of this war or the break in this war, there's going to be a mental health tsunami crash down on this country. Right. We are seeing, if there's gaps in the general services, enormous gaps, almost non-existent services, mental health services for people with developmental disabilities. And that is something that Beit Issie is very focused on now, both in our existing mental health clinic, which we have in Ra'anana, but also we are now launching a training program for psychologists and therapists so that we can shift the needle and close that gap and develop new cohorts of therapists in Israel who actually are confident and skilled in how to work with people with intellectual and cognitive disabilities as therapists, as psychologists, because that skill set and the motivation in the system does not exist. And so the kinds of people we work with, who are beautiful souls, are left without the psychotherapy that they need. And it's tremendously sad. And Beit Issie, as it's always done, will not stand back. When they see a need and a gap, we will develop this. And we are going to develop a residency program so people can train at Beit Issie and develop that niche, which is so critical.
And they also have to be compensated properly for wherever they go, because that's already been an issue. Look, we realized that there was a crisis here already with COVID, with the youth, with people who are in their homes. I mean, that was around the world. Everybody listening knows exactly what I'm talking about. And we really hadn't climbed out of that when this hit. But one of the things that I remember being discussed, because in Israel, at least, you have, a lot of people working under the different ministries and being compensated or not properly compensated by the government ministries. I mean, do you work at all with the government? I don't know if this is like a minefield that you don't want to necessarily get into. Is this completely private? Do you work at all with any of the health ministries and social service ministries in Israel?
Yes, 100%. We have good relationships, strong relationships for decades now with the Israeli government and all Israeli governments. Okay. We work very closely with the health ministry, with the education ministry, with the welfare ministry. We have a very interesting model. Our budget is most Israeli direct service social service providers in Israel, nonprofits, get about 80 to 90% of their funding from Israeli government. Right. We chose very early that we don't want to follow that model. And so we receive about 40% from Israeli government. Why is that? Because we want to be an innovative organization, a pioneering organization, which we are. That's why we create new therapies. That's why we have our own tech center and our leadership center and so on. And so
You can maintain your independence to a great degree. Yeah.
Yes, and we maintain our ability to be innovative and think big.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do instead is that we rely quite significantly on philanthropy,
Right.
about 40%. By the way, we have some really good supporters from Israel as well, and that's important that Israelis are also supporting us philanthropically.
Absolutely.
But we rely heavily on supporters from the US, from the UK, and Canada in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have self-generated income. We actually sell some of our services. So if you want to come and do hydrotherapy or come to our dental clinic, which is a specific gold standard dental clinic for people with Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, and other disabilities, it's a pay for service. Okay, we never turn anyone away. We
Right.
never turn anyone away who can't pay.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's our model, a little bit different budget wise.
Right. Okay,
But
so
yes,
if someone's listening to this and they're a therapist or they're not a therapist and want to be and are intrigued by what you're doing from wherever they are, they can be in touch with you.
100%.
Okay, fantastic. Then I'll include that information in the text for this podcast.
Yeah,
Okay.
very good.
Michael, thank you so much. Really.
been a
Anything else
pleasure.
you want to add?
I would just say that, as you said before, there's so much good in this land of milk and honey, and it's an absolute joy. It's actually a privilege for me to work in an organization that's thinking big, but keeping its eyes on needs at the
Right.
grassroots. And let's keep investing in the startup nation, and let's make it strong, and let's keep it healthy, and let's keep it giving to all Israelis and people around the world. And that's what we're doing at Beit Issie as well.
Amazing. Okay, thank you so much. And what can I say? I hope that you don't have any new patients because there's no one that new that needs to come to you. That's the only thing I could say.
Everyone should be healthy and safe.
Yeah, I'm
God
into
willing.
that. Thank you so much. All
Thank
right,
you.
everyone. Just another little glimpse of this glorious, tortured country that I get to live in. Amazing place on all levels. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to Ben and to Tabitha, as usual, for editing and putting out the show. Eve Harow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. And thank you all. Thank you all for tuning in and for caring. Take care, everybody. And goodbye for now.